watching a program on Japanese TV about a man who studies an insect that apparently has a male sex organ. And well, I took entomology in college, and well, I gotta say I didn't get too much into it, and I think I got a C in it. Just I didn't study. I just didn't. Well, what I'm thinking about in relation to this program is how when I was in college, I was in my junior year. It was springtime, and I was taking a course in literary criticism, the history of literary criticism, which pretty much starts with Aristotle and continues forward. And, in this particular class, I was incredibly responsive to the teacher. Normally in college, I was quiet in class, but for some reason in this class, I don't know, the answers were just coming to me when the teacher asked a question. The professor, she'd ask something and my hand would go up, and I don't know how it happened in this class, but it did. And my hand was up, and I was talking all the time in that class. And this is amazing because usually I was way too shy to talk in college. So, I mean, in English classes, I also took Italian, and that was more like a kind of a friendly atmosphere. So there was no problem speaking up in Italian class. Some of the teaching assistants just seemed to love me because I was part Italian. I don't know what it was, but it was like that. And that was a different experience than classes in English, which was my major. Those English classes tended to be pretty large in terms of numbers of students in the class. And on the whole, I just was quiet in those classes. But in literary criticism class, teacher said something, and yes, blah, 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 but I talked. Well, I read this book called Anatomy of Criticism by Northrop Frye, okay? Because we had to choose a book to write a paper on. And I chose that one simply because I like the idea of literary criticism being approached as a science with a classification system and everything, like a real science, like something like zoology, where you're going to classify different types of animals and so on. This is a vertebrate, an invertebrate, and so on. And you're going to do this kind of thing, and it's a science, right? And this man, Northrop Frye, was proposing in this book, Anatomy of Criticism, that literary criticism, which was far from a science the way it had been practiced over the centuries, to sum up what literary criticism has been, in my opinion, it's like a rich man's pastime for the control of the creative processes of entire peoples. Okay? Which is why, let me just quickly give this example. When we think about a poet who dies in the gutter, right? Speaking figuratively, who are we going to be thinking about? Because there must be a half dozen or more poets that die every single day in the gutter. But who are we going to be talking about, thinking about all the time? Edgar Allan Poe. Who is Allan, the rich man in the Poe story? Okay? And so it's not just Edgar Poe, it's Edgar Allan Poe we're concerned about. He's the one we're going to be interested in, the descendant of the rich man, the poet who dies in the gutter, who's connected up with the rich. Okay, after a while, you notice this kind of thing going on. And then you have the literary critics in England and so on they go to Oxford and this kind of thing. And you can see the control exercised by an elite class down through history. Okay, so to me, the idea that we're going to make literary criticism of science available to everybody, not just an elite or to rich folks who are just like indulging themselves when they got plenty of time and money on their hands to do this kind of thing. No, it's going to make it a science like any other science. So was I interested in that idea? And I read that book and wrote my paper in that book, and believe me, that was extremely complex book to be reading for somebody like me, and it was very, very tough assignment to write that paper. However, I found after that I wanted to understand Northrop Frye as far as literary criticism went, and I wanted to put in practice his ideas as I went forward in my study of literature. So now, in all my classes, I was looking at his theory of literary criticism, trying to figure it out and how to apply it in every single paper I wrote, and every book I read, and everything I thought about literature. Well, I went on doing that through graduate school, so that my thesis was Anatomy of Moby Dick, the archetypal structure. That is an analysis of Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick in terms of Northrop Frye's way of interpreting literature. 100%, okay? So after graduate school, I went on studying Northrop Frye. I bought all his books, and I read them more than once. And I was just going on. I was trying to be a creative writer during those years, but at the same time, I was trying to learn everything I could about Northrop Frye. And there are some things to this day I don't completely understand. And I've read his books over and over and thought about his ideas. Well, here's the point. I went on doing this for years, okay? Let's say I'm middle-aged. I was around maybe 50 years old. And I'm still, well, how about with Northrop Frye? How would I do this in terms of anatomy of criticism? How does this fit in? And suddenly I noticed, I said to myself, hey, I don't see a single person out there in reality putting into practice this man's ideas as he wanted them to be put in practice. He wanted school systems to take up his way of interpreting literature and make that the way of interpreting literature for entire school systems of nations. Okay, he was a Canadian, but as far as I know, his way of interpreting literature was not adopted in Canada in their school system. The only way you can tell that is by looking at the literary criticism produced. Okay, you can check that in the Library of Congress, right, which has all the publications from around the world, and you go looking for papers and examples of criticism the way he would have wanted it done. And I did that when I was around 50 years old. I went to the Library of Congress and started researching, where is anybody besides me putting this guy's views into practice? And I couldn't find a single person. Now, it was said all throughout let's call it the literary kingdom, okay, that Northrop Frye was a world-renowned literary scholar and critic, okay? And yet, nobody worldwide was putting his ideas into practice the way he wanted them to. Nobody, not a single person. I couldn't find a single example like my thesis, Anatomy of Criticism. And I went and I kept that thesis and I updated it with a more updated version of the accepted scholarly edition of Moby Dick that came along years after I'd written my thesis. And I went back and changed all the page references, and I made them refer to the more updated version, scholarly version of Moby Dick. And I changed some of the wording of my own thesis to make it more up to date that way too. I did things like that, and I self-published that thesis, and I sent a copy to the Northrop Frye Library in Canada, and I got a very nice letter back of thanks. But I gotta say, I never saw anywhere that anybody had done anything like what I had done. And so I was thinking to myself, just think if you were Northrop Frye. And I got a picture of him up in my office bedroom. It's the picture that was on the back of what I consider his greatest book, The Secular Scripture, a study of the structure of romance. I think that's the title. I threw that book out. When I threw all my books out, oh my God, I threw my most precious books out, all into the dump, and that was one of them. My God, I threw away that book, but I did keep the, what's that called, the cover, right, of the hardback copy I had, and his picture was on the back, and I have that framed. Well, just think if you were Northrop Frye. You're considered a world-renowned literary critic. Everybody's saying, this is one of the greatest critics and scholars in literary history, and not a single person is doing what you're saying they ought to be doing. How would you feel? Well, in addition to that, I was saying to myself, look, all these years I was like going out into this forest, wandering out into a forest, okay? Familiarizing myself with this country, okay? This unknown land of literary criticism, Northrop Frye style. And I'm there out in this forest, wandering deeper and deeper into the forest. And I don't notice that I'm alone. I'm completely alone in that forest. But when I'm around 50 years old, and by the time I'm 60, I realize, hey, I'm the only one here. And I remember back in literary criticism class when I was a junior in college, the breathtaking way that the teacher was describing Northrop Frye, one of the greatest literary critics in history, which really got, oh boy. And he's advocating a scientific way of approaching the study of literature. Oh boy, great. But I'm 50, 60, and I say, hey, I'm completely alone here. And like I said, I went to the Library of Congress, and I researched all through there to try to find something like what I had written years before for my master's thesis, and I couldn't find a single thing. Not a single thing. Well, that's all I wanted to say. I was watching this program on TV, and those are the thoughts that came to me as I was watching it. Is there a moral to this story? Let me put this on pause and see if there's some way I can conclude these remarks other than just say, well, that's all for now. Let me think. Hold on a second. By way of conclusion, this painting behind me, my wife painted this. I designed the painting. I put Northrop Frye there, put this here. This is from a famous American painting, this guy here, and this is an allusion to that famous American painting, but this was my idea, his hand coming out of the sea, and the ship there, like Melville's whaling ships. And I got to say, this is an outstanding likeness of Northrop Frye. And my wife painted this, and I just want to say that my wife is an outstanding artist. She's deaf, profoundly deaf. She also cannot talk. I'm trying to say that in a way that deaf people won't get offended. They might say I should say she does not talk, but she cannot talk. So anyway, she painted this, and I think it's an outstanding painting. And I used this as the cover for what came to be the publication of my updated thesis. Now, that's all. My wife is a completely unrecognized artist, yet from the beginning, when I met my wife, I said, I recognized me. I said, this person is an outstanding artist. So she's illustrated and done the covers for all my self-publications. And, well, I'm an unrecognized writer. I never published a single word, and now I'm making videos like this one, and I see on my phone, 0 views. But I've gone on making the videos anyway, just like I did writing my books, my poems, my essays, my novels. I went on writing them even though no one would publish them. Yet I went after that challenge as if my life depended on it, as if my livelihood depended, my reputation on this earth, everything was dependent on it. I was a writer, I still am one, and yet I've got 0 recognition. But, you know, I think now, here's this man, Northrop Frye, regarded worldwide as famous, and yet he must have known that. How was he worldwide famous when his views that apparently got him this fame were being completely ignored as part of the fame? Well, so recognition, I'm not sure what part it plays in the pursuit of truth and the exercise of our skills and the direction of our curiosity and our intellect while we're alive. I'm not sure that recognition is why we should be doing these things. In my case, it hasn't been helpful at all, and as you can see, it has a highly ironic